he used, I think, more assertive language to characterize the fact that Taiwan and China are two separate political systems that are not subordinate to each other.
Recently, Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te marked his first year in office, a year defined by rising cross-strait tensions and growing domestic challenges. Since taking office, President Lai has faced mounting pressure from Beijing, which has escalated military maneuvers and coercive tactics in response to what many view as Lai's more assertive rhetoric on Taiwan's sovereignty and efforts to push back against Chinese influence. At home, President Lai's administration has struggled to advance key policies, with the China-friendly opposition Kuomintang party and the smaller Taiwan People's Party using their majority to block Lai's agenda and freeze funding across a range of issues, including defense. In this episode, we speak with William Lai, senior analyst at the International Crisis Group, to unpack President Lai's first year in office, how his approach to China is evolving, and how he is positioning Taiwan to navigate the complex challenges ahead. Hello and welcome to Perspectives with Nilo. I'm your host, Nilo Sullivan. If you are new to the podcast, we've got over 60 past episodes waiting for you, and you can explore all of them on our blog at pwnilo.com or by searching for Perspectives with Nilo wherever you get your podcasts. And we'd really appreciate a like, follow or subscribe if you enjoy our content. And thanks in advance for your support. These are challenging times for many world leaders, and no less so for the democratically elected leader of Taiwan, Lai Ching-te. Lai Ching-te, or William Lai, was inaugurated as the President of Taiwan on May 20th, 2024. He succeeded Tsai Ing-wen, and his election to the presidential office marks the first time for his party, the Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, to hold this office for 3 consecutive terms. While the DPP won the presidential vote, they failed to maintain a majority in the Legislative Yuan, or Parliament. As a result, the parliament has been controlled by the Chinese Nationalist Party, or Kuomintang, and their smaller ally, the Taiwan People's Party, who have sought to block Lai's agenda, freeze or cut budgets, including defense programs, and interfere with the operations of the country's top court. While the KMT insist that they are seeking to strengthen and protect Taiwan's democracy, the general public would not appear to agree, and a mass recall effort is well underway, which could unseat up to 20 KMT lawmakers and change the balance of power for Lai's administration. This is a topic we will deal with in more detail in some upcoming episodes. In the area of cross-strait relations, President Lai has adopted a stronger rhetoric that characterizes Taiwan as a de facto sovereign state and has moved away from the more cautious tone of his predecessor. In a speech on March 13, 2025, President Lai publicly characterized China as a foreign hostile force trying to annex Taiwan and stamp out the Republic of China, a phrasing unprecedented for a Taiwanese president. In response, Beijing has repeatedly described Lai as a dangerous separatist and increased military drills and grey zone operations around Taiwan, including conducting large-scale blockade-style military exercises in response to his major speeches. In this episode, I sit down with William Lai, Senior Northeast Asia Analyst at the International Crisis Group, an independent non-profit NGO dedicated to preventing and resolving deadly conflict. We dive into William's recent article on President Lai's first year in office and examine how his administration has responded to mounting pressure from China. We also look at Taiwan public opinion and the challenges President Lai faces in navigating political tensions with the opposition KMT and TPP. But first, I asked William for his assessment of why cross-strait relations have grown increasingly strained during President Lai's first year in office.
Yeah, so I think we have to first sort of take a step back and realize the background, and I think the cross-strait dynamic that he inherited when he came into office is the fact that China began to step up its military pressure against Taiwan since August 2022. After the very, I think, famous visit by the former U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, they conducted a more than a week-long military exercise around Taiwan And that sort of became, I think, the bottom line and also the new normal around Taiwan, which is that China now, since then, basically have been deploying military aircraft and naval vessels to the areas around Taiwan on almost a daily basis. And that basically, I think, it has prompted the Taiwan government to also increase its sort of rhetoric and also its policies to protect against such a Chinese pressure campaign. And so I think when Lai won the presidential election in January 2024, immediately after that, China began to use very harsh rhetoric to describe him, basically accused him of being this Taiwan independent activist and advocate, and then started using different ways to put pressure on him even before he took office, including taking away another diplomatic ally from Taiwan, and then deploy their Coast Guard vessels to waters around the outlying islands of Taiwan that were supposed to not see any presence of Chinese government vessels. And so these then, I think, prompted the incoming government to believe that it's no longer viable for Taiwan to adopt a more restrained posture and stance towards China, because Beijing clearly was not recognizing the efforts that Taiwan was putting into to prevent cross-strait relations from deteriorating. Rather, they see a need to harden Taiwan's rhetoric and also position and policies against what they view as an increasingly more aggressive China. And so I think that's what we saw after he came into power. He used, I think, more assertive language to characterize the fact that Taiwan and China are two separate political systems that are not subordinate to each other. And this is, I think, a very, important point and also position that he is trying to make to counter what China is also increasingly trying to spread the narrative, which is that Taiwan is an inseparable part of China, and using some past United Nations resolution and sort of twist and distort the original meaning of it to fit its narrative. And so in this way, apart from that, we are also seeing his government really stepping up the efforts to, increase and enlarge the scale and frequency of Taiwan's military exercises, enhance Taiwan's defense budget, and at the same time implementing some laws to root out what he views as China's increasing threat through the infiltration campaigns that they have been conducting over the years.
I guess an example of Lai's rhetoric that you kind of alluded to there was invoking of the ROC Constitution, the Republic of China Constitution, to strengthen his argument that Taiwan is a separate political system from China, and that the ROC and the PRC are not subordinate. Can you tell us a little more about the subtleties of that?
Right. So, his predecessor, former President Tsai Ing-wen, sort of adopted a more conciliatory and restrained sort of framing of cross-strait relations, where she sticked with the line that she would be conducting cross-strait affairs in accordance with the ROC Constitution and the Cross-Strait Act, which essentially these two documents still contained the sort of suggestion that both sides of the Taiwan Strait are one China. But, who is the leader and the legal representative of that one China? She refrained from very clearly identifying that. So leaving the room of ambiguity for both sides to argue that this one China refers to the Republic of China, which is Taiwan's official name, or Beijing could also say that this one China is the People's Republic of China. And that sort of, I think, is a framing that she thought would appeal to China's argument that the People's Republic of China is the only legal representative of this one China in the international system, but at the same time allowed her to go back and convince and sort of showcase the Taiwanese public that the one China is Taiwan and Taiwan is a sovereign state. But then when, after 8 years of sticking with that framing and not really seeing Beijing reciprocating any goodwill that she was intended to send to Beijing as a compromise, then the Lai administration came in seeing a more aggressive Beijing trying to erode Taiwan's existence as a sovereign state and also removing any space for maneuvering for both sides and ambiguity. So he believes that then he needs to use also and cite the ROC Constitution without stepping too far away from declaring Taiwan's official independence. He stick with the ROC Constitution, but in a way to strengthen the argument that it's very important for Taiwan to highlight its separate status from China. Even if that separate status does not mean Taiwan independence, it's very important for him to repeatedly highlight that once he took office. And I think apart from that, he also saw the need to argue and emphasize that both sides of the Taiwan Strait do not subordinate to each other. And what that means is that Taiwan does not own China, and China does not have any jurisdiction over Taiwan. And so that's, goes back to his point of strengthening this separate and de facto sovereignty that Taiwan has been enjoying and upholding since basically the nationalist government came to Taiwan in 1949.
And this position of not being subordinate to each other is also in line with Taiwan's public opinion, according to what you say in the article.
Yes, because growing majority of Taiwanese public, Taiwanese people in public opinions show that they support such a stance, which is that Taiwan and China are two separate political systems, and they prefer that to be the fact that the president would repeatedly highlight in public speeches and public opinions.
So on the Chinese side then, in terms of the tensions raising up, what are we seeing? Is it just increased military drills and activity? You mentioned there's almost incursions into Taiwan's Adis on a daily basis and so on. Are there other things other than the military activity that we're seeing that are increasing the tensions?
Yeah, so, apart from the military aspect of the operation, which really now is on a daily basis, and it's aiming at dividing the Taiwanese public opinion and I think trying to ingrain a sense of fear, but at the same time allowing the Chinese military to really become comfortable operating around the terrains, the waters and the airs around Taiwan. On the other side, the Chinese government has introduced a series of very punitive legal measures targeting what they view as Taiwan independence activists and forces. They passed this 22 measures that essentially could land someone that they deem as a Taiwan independence advocate, life imprisonment or even death sentences in, carried out by China. And that, I think, essentially is to deter anyone going to China to still hold the view that Taiwan and China are two separate political systems. Rather, they want more people going to China to feel compelled or coerced into embracing the idea that China and, Taiwan is a part of China. And they are basically setting that as the condition for anyone who still feels comfortable enough to travel to China, and use that to sort of I think, wrestle back the public opinion trend that they've been witnessing, which is a big concern for Beijing.
So on the military activity again, I get a sense when I read your commentary that your assessment is that President Lai's rhetoric and maybe the other measures taken to counter China's infiltration and influence operations that you mentioned, all of these are the reasons China is responding or being more aggressive towards Taiwan. Is that a correct interpretation?
From the Chinese perspective, yes, because they view the Lai rhetoric, the policies, and the government's stance as further emboldening this public opinion that they view as drifting away from the desired status that Beijing would have wanted, which means that they see the Lai administration's stance and policy and rhetoric as encouraging the Taiwanese public from further resisting the possibility of reunification with China. And so that also means that in Beijing's eyes, the possibility of a peaceful unification with Taiwan is closing and it's becoming more remote. And so they felt like in order to stop this trend from further exacerbating, the best way for them is to use more forceful measures, which is military, to coerce and to stop this trend from further accelerating.
And one of the examples you give in the article again on this is that in the 1 year since President Lai took office, China has staged 3 major military exercises around Taiwan, whereas during the 8-year tenure of his predecessor, Tsai Ing-wen, China only staged 2 blockades or military-style exercises. Is that a good kind of indicator or litmus test of how China's position is getting more tense?
I mean, I think that's definitely one of the many indicators of the sense of urgency that Beijing is feeling, that the window of opportunity for them to fulfill unification without resorting to military measures is really closing. And so they need to start adopting and enforcing and carrying out more aggressive measures in order to stop the window from closing further. And, I think we have to see again that prior to August 2022, they did not see the need to resort to such a dramatic and also very aggressive show of flex of military muscle, because they felt like the trend of public opinion in Taiwan and the government's position was still within the range that they can manage. But since August 2022, because of, I think, what they view as also a very dramatic change in the U.S. policy towards Taiwan, and they feel like that's going to further embolden Taiwan from implementing measures and policies that will further, I think, harden the fact that Taiwan is separate from China. And so from then on, in 2022, 2023, they use excuses or occasions of Taiwan's leader meeting high-level political leaders in the U.S. as the justification for such a blockade-style military exercise. And, that frequency then really picked up after Lai took office in May 2024, which whenever there is a major speech or a major political occasion for him, then China would use that as a way or as a justification for this kind of blockade-style military exercise. And I think from there we can see that they just simply see the, again, need to flex their military muscle in such a very visible way, because they see this as now part of the drill, part of the new normal of their operations around Taiwan.
I guess it's maybe not that easy to break it into what Lai's rhetoric is prompting versus what was going on before he took office. Insofar as if I look at like the history of drills and so on, it seems like they were ramping up anyway in like 2023,
right.
Before he took office. But I suppose the other thing here that we don't know is that the PLA's approach may be evolving. They may have decided they've learned some things from all the previous exercises they've done, and now blockades are much more appropriate for them to carry out, because this is part of their approach if they have to take real action in the future. Then maybe this is where they want to get more experience, right? So in other words, it's evolution of their approach, right, from things they've learned.
Yeah, exactly. I think as their military become more modernized and become more capable and have more different options for them to consider, rather than just the brute force, invasion, landing their troops on Taiwan's shores, they realize that the most cost-effective and also, I think, efficient way for them to force Taiwan to eventually capitulate into a reunification is, in fact, to cut Taiwan off from the outside world and use this prolonged period of isolation, both materialistically, but also psychologically, and also communication-wise, is to just, impose this both physical, but also technological, but also communication sort of blockade around Taiwan, sort of quarantine Taiwan from being able to, ship materials in and outside of Taiwan, prevent other countries nearby, including the U.S. forces in nearby countries, from being engaged and involved. And at the same time, I think essentially impose maritime control over the waters and the airspaces around Taiwan, so that they can show the world and also show the Taiwanese public that now China owns the waters and the air spaces all across Taiwan, around Taiwan, and start to, I think, exacerbate that sense of crisis within Taiwan. And so to deepen that internal division, and it maybe eventually lead to the government in Taiwan giving in to the public discontent because of the lack of resources, lack of food, lack of energy, basically lack of the materials for Taiwan to continue to hold on as a separate political system or a de facto sovereign state.
In your article also, you talk about the fact that, Lai's stance and Beijing's increased military pressure that you've been mentioning, together are putting additional stress on this decades-old status quo. But I guess whatever about President Lai's rhetoric, aren't the CCP the ones who have been pretty direct in their desire to change the status quo? In other words, insofar as Xi Jinping has said, he will take Taiwan by force if necessary, and he's also told the PLA to be ready by 2027. And the CCP have clearly been ramping up their military spending significantly, as we've seen. So in terms of maintaining the status quo, China would appear not to want to do that. And doesn't that put Taiwan's president in an impossible position?
Exactly. I think that's the caveat here, looking at the situation across the Taiwan Strait, is that I think President Lai, unfortunately, came into power at a particularly difficult time for any Taiwan leader to really even try to strike that balance between maintaining the status quo, but at the same time, adopting very practical measures to beef up Taiwan's ability to defend itself and counter threats coming from China. I think, like you said, even before he took office, China had already seized opportunities that, as they see, to alter the, I think, power balance and also the long-standing tacit agreement and understanding that both sides have reached. They kept going back to the fact that that was because the Taiwanese leadership refused to accept certain positions that Beijing favors and preferred the Taiwan leadership to adopt so that they could still maintain cooperation, dialogue, or, that tacit agreement that they sort of achieved decades ago. I think that's basically because China's proposal had basically become politically impossible for any Taiwan leader to actually just comfortably, and openly sign on to, which is that they used to say that, have this framing called the 92 consensus, which is that both sides of the Taiwan Strait would agree that there's only one China, but they have ambiguity and room to interpret what that means. But ever since 2016, when former President Tsai Ing-wen came into power, China has I think shrink the basically essentially harden their definition on what 92 consensus means. They're now connecting the 92 consensus, almost equating to as, from their perspective, is one country, two systems, which means that there's only one China, but there could be two separate systems running. But that then, I think, basically rules out the possibility for the Taiwanese side to also have the agency to also interpret how they view that one China. And so that essentially is making it impossible for even President Tsai to accept that framing. And so I think that then is the source of China changing the long-standing status quo and tacit agreement. That was the first step. And then they just went further, physically, by inching further towards or ignoring, say, the median line of the Taiwan Strait, and also the agreed upon restricted waters around the outlying islands. And so these are all the steps that China has adopted since 2016 to further erode the sovereignty or the space for Taiwan to assert that.
I saw a quote from you on X, which I thought actually was very interesting. And you said, I think, that Lai is drawing clear red lines in order to discourage China. And there's now a general consensus within the Lai administration that Tsai's comparative restraint only wound up inviting increased pressure from Beijing. So this is a new approach by Lai, basically.
Yes, I think basically is... I would characterize it as safeguarding Taiwan sovereignty through enhanced deterrence, which means that I think the conclusion, not only him, but also people within the ruling party, the foreign policy national security establishment here that are from the DPP, I think the consensus is that a more restrained posture adopted by Taiwan is no longer not necessary. It's no longer viable to safeguard Taiwan's own sovereign existence. And so in order to maintain that, Taiwan needs to become more, I think, harden its position, and then adopt more deterrence measures to make sure that China understand these are the red lines that it cannot cross if it still wants to maintain somewhat of a certain level of engagement across the Taiwan Strait.
And certainly while there are some, I guess, sound bites in Lai's speeches that are highlighted, like him calling China a hostile foreign force, he has also made attempts to say some conciliatory things. And this is something you touch on when you talk about maybe diffusing the tensions or cooling the situation. So he has made conciliatory gestures, both in his inauguration speech and recently in his May 20th speech. Can you tell us a little bit about those kind of things that he has said?
Yeah, so I think that's just basically a continuation from decades of Taiwanese leaders, that they all know that it's important to publicly declare that they're still very willing to engage with China and to maintain cooperation. But it's also important to note that it was since former President Tsai came into office that the DPP leaders, the consecutive DPP leaders, have all highlighted the importance that these engagement and cooperation and dialogue should be conducted on the basis of equal footing, which means that China should not, consider that these engagements are conducted, on the basis that they own Taiwan, because that's not how the Taiwanese leadership view it. And so I think that's a very important distinction compared to leaders that came before Tsai, which is former President Ma Ying-jeou from the more China-friendly Kuomintang, KMT, which essentially was even more conciliatory towards China's position that triggered some public pushback because they felt like the president at the time was risking giving more of Taiwan's sovereignty in, or sacrificing Taiwan's sovereignty for the sake of maintaining some level of cross-strait engagement. And they felt like that's going to threaten Taiwan's sovereignty eventually. And so coming back to, I think, President Lai's rhetoric and position is that he still, I think, publicly, repeatedly would express his willingness to conduct that, but also at the same time highlighting the very important, essential benchmark, which is that everything cross-strait cooperation dialogue should be conducted on the equal footing. But obviously, in Beijing's eyes, they felt like they only saw the more hardened rhetoric, like the external hostile forces sort of label, as the essence of Lai's position. So they would not trust any of the more conciliatory, rhetoric and measures that President Lai had introduced and shown. And so I think from their view, they still think that the more hardened language is the sign and the source of their skepticism towards President Lai's, I think, in Beijing's view, President Lai's, willingness or goodwill, or they just simply don't trust him anymore or anything that he says. And so unfortunately, when we are looking at it from Beijing's perspective, President Lai's conciliatory language would then be drowned out by his more hardened language and position.
So other than the relations with China, are there any other notable policies or initiatives that President Lai has advanced in his first year of office?
So, I think on the other side of this equation, obviously, is the Taiwan's relationship with the United States. And we know that U.S.-Taiwan relationship has really made great strides under already the former President Tsai's leadership. There were unprecedented level of U.S. visits, and the growing frequency of U.S. congressional visits to Taiwan, and also on practical level, the bilateral cooperation in different sectors have also deepened. And I think President Lai had essentially continued on that trend by seizing onto opportunities to make Taiwan and U.S. more intertwined in different ways, especially even after U.S. President Donald Trump came back into power in January. Essentially, I think President Lai has identified that the best way to secure and maintain this robust level of cooperation between the U.S. and Taiwan is to increase the amount and the amount of Taiwan investment in the U.S., especially the high-tech semiconductor sector, because that was obviously one major area that President Trump had eluded in his public speeches and opinions, that he saw Taiwan as potentially stealing the semiconductor technology from Taiwan, and that was contributing to the huge trade deficit that the U.S. suffers against Taiwan. So in order for Taiwan to balance that, and also shown that Taiwan is not stealing from the U.S., but rather Taiwan is willing to contribute to the U.S. reshoring of its manufacturing capabilities, then I think the President Lai had really prioritize increasing Taiwanese investment back into the U.S. and, doing so at this basically made the supply chain between the U.S. and Taiwan more intertwined. And in a way, I think he believes that could buy Taiwan some, security guarantee as well, because if both sides, economic and also trade and also supply chain, are so intertwined, the U.S. would have a lot of interest and stake in the safety of Taiwan and in Taiwan maintaining its sovereign status, because then that would guarantee that the U.S. would have very prioritized access to a lot of these advanced semiconductor chips, and that would benefit the Trump administration's priority as well.
How much, though, are, I guess, President Lai's initiatives curtailed by the fact that the DPP do not have a majority in the Legislative Yuan, and the divisive nature of the proceedings that we've seen over the last 12 months or so?
Yeah, so let's say one big area that has repeatedly been brought up as a still existing source of not tension, but just point that the U.S. would use to push Taiwan is the need to significantly enhance Taiwan's defense budget. And that's an area where the Taiwan government needs to work with now the opposition-held legislature or the parliament to achieve that goal. But we have seen growing an escalating tension between the legislature and the executive branch of the government to reach consensus on these key issues, because there were just these two forces, the opposition parties and the ruling party had just become increasingly more combative towards each other, and the atmosphere now is even reaching, I think, a point of hostility because of this latest wave of recall campaigns that is being launched against the more than 30 opposition lawmakers at this point. And that, has really, I think, soured the relationship and eliminated a lot of the, remaining room that were still there for both sides to cooperate on or even reaching consensus. So it will remain to be seen how President Lai would be able to navigate that and manage that differences, and at times maybe make some concessions to allow the opposition party to feel like there are room for them to also compromise and work with Lai on certain issues that he wants to prioritize.
And how about public opinion on President Lai after the first year? Are there any polls or results that give us a feel for how well the public perceive his performance?
I think he has largely remained pretty steady in the public opinion polls. I think despite the difficulty and challenges that he has faced domestically on a lot of the domestic agendas that he wanted to prioritize, I think his emphasis on strengthening national security and his commitment to enhancing Taiwan's defense and his more just hardened position on cross-strait relations has helped to maintain his support rate at around 46, 47, and that was the latest opinion polls timed around May 20th, the anniversary of his inauguration. So I would say he has found a way to keep his approval rating at somewhat of a high level, I would say, for any Taiwan leader. But going forward, I think how he manages Taiwan's relationship with the U.S. without making the public feel like Taiwan is making too much concessions, and at the same time, how he manages the relationship with the opposition party, including, how he positions his party in the upcoming local election next year, I think these will all be factors that will and could affect his approval rating going forward.
And it kind of related to that, the other thing that I've seen discussed kind of recently is maybe the emergence of factions in his own party, in the DPP party. I mean, from what I understand, under Tsai Ing-wen, these factions were less prominent. She maintained an ability to keep people more unified. But there is commentary now saying that there's a more of an emergence of factions in the DPP. So I'm curious, have you observed that ideologically? How do these factions differ, or what are the main points, I guess, that they differ on? And how do you think, the emergence of these factions would bode for the future of President Lai Ching-te's term?
So I think it's important to highlight that these factions have always existed in Taiwan or in the DPP since its founding. And they've always been competing for influence within the party. Even during President Tsai's era. I think the only difference maybe is that President Lai has we can say, clearer agenda for how he wants the party to move forward. And I think that often also comes with how a party leader, balance different factions for, giving them different roles to play, different, amount of influence and things like that. And I think these faction differences are bubbling up right now because there are certain local races that are already playing out for next year's local election that unfortunately are being, I think, pitted as one faction trying to compete with another faction. And there's a lot of media speculation about which local figure was favored by Lai versus a figure that is not favored by Lai. And I think while certainly there is a different style and leadership, I think feature that Lai brings into the picture as a DPP leader compared to Tsai, I think ultimately his goal is still to ensure that the DPP could be able to do better in the local elections compared to the last two times, because unfortunately they have been doing pretty badly at the local elections for the last two times, especially this past 2022 one, because they were only able to hold on to, I think, 6 seats across Taiwan, which was a big reduction from at their height, which is in 2014, the local election, where they grab more seats from the KMT than before. And so I think that's why I go back to the local election as an indicator of his approval rating, but also his ability to guide and the party to navigate this I think national landscape, because again he came into power as a leader of the minority in the parliament. That also shows that there's a growing discontent, or maybe just a growing decreasing support for his party from 2020 to 2024. And that's definitely a warning sign that any leader of the ruling party will have to take into account.
So finally, I want to ask you about his vice president, Xiaobi Kim, who's also had her first year as vice president. Prior to taking this role, she was Taiwan's special envoy to the US and received much praise for her work in that role. So what have we seen from Xiaobi Kim in her first year as vice president of Taiwan?
I think Vice President Xiao has tried her best to play the very important supporting role as the vice president, but because unfortunately, the vice president role a lot of the times is more ceremonial. So she wasn't able to maybe have as much visible impact as we saw when she was the representative to the US, where she really could make a lot of direct impact and also influence that would be visible and also people would be able to refer to. But, I think one of the most important example that to show how important her connection with the U.S. and also her expertise in foreign policy has been was the fact that she had been playing instrumental roles in Taiwan's ongoing trade negotiation with the Trump administration because of her connection in Washington, D.C. She apparently made a speech at one of the virtual meetings and negotiations prior to the start of that negotiation. And at the same time, she contributed a lot to the drafting of Taiwan's approach and also helping Taiwan to formulate a very consistent set of position in order to deal with the highly unpredictable Trump administration. So, I think the fact that Taiwan had been able to be characterized as one of the few countries that have been prioritized by the Trump administration for the trade talks translates into her expertise and also her role, very instrumental role in this administration's ability to manage relationship with the U.S. And I think going forward, that's definitely going to continue to be an area that she will be able to play a very important advisory role in helping to shape Taiwan's approach towards the U.S. going forward for at least until the 2028 election.
Well, William, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you very much for talking with us on the podcast and sharing your insights.
Thank you.
That's William Yang, who is a senior analyst at the International Crisis Group, speaking with me recently in Taipei. My sincere thanks again to William for sharing his valuable insights with us on Perspectives with Nilo. We've linked his article in the Dive Deeper section of our blog, and we've also included links and references to additional information for all of the topics discussed in this episode. You can find it at pwnilo.com. I also want to let you know that we are working on some exciting new episodes on topics such as the Grand Recall, the ongoing turmoil in Taiwan's domestic politics, as well as China's influence operations, and much more. Be sure to hit that subscribe or follow button on your favourite listening app so that you don't miss out on these future episodes. It would also help us a lot and is the best way to support our efforts. And thanks in advance for your support. But that's where we leave it for now. Thank you for listening, and until the next time, from Taipei, Taiwan, Zai Tian.